Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I will be taking a look at Matt Madden's new collection of short constrained comics works called Six Treasures of the Spiral, Comics Formed Under Pressure. This is another one that Tom Kaczynski from Uncivilized Books sent over, so it's an Uncivilized production. Please, please, please go grab yourself a copy of this from Uncivilized because it's a really amazing contribution to the medium of comics. Uncivilized is one of the smartest, if not the smartest. I'm gonna say the smartest. I'm sorry, Sean, but like Tom is always like he's our rogue philosopher, our rogue academic philosopher as a publisher, and that shows in his work. So what's going on in this book is Matt has a bunch of different constraints, and I guess I should start from the back on this one. He has a bunch of different formal constraints on what has to go into a story. So like the six treasures of the Spiral comic, he's showing the form here and showing, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each one represents a character, and like these characters have to be in this panel or whatever. So there's a lot of constraints or algorithms that control what can be done in the books, and then Matt has to come up with a story that fits that constraint. So I'll go through and just give examples of these throughout the book, some of the fun stuff going on. And then Matt's really good about finding a way to wrap the conceit of the constraint into the story in some way as well. When you're working with constrained comics like this, the impact of the story is always going to be telling a well-told, emotionally relevant story is always going to be hard in these situations. And I think Matt fails and succeeds kind of in equal amounts on that part. Like some of the constraints, it's harder for him to tell an impactful story. It's more just like a silly thing or something like that, setting up a fun joke or whatever. And then some of them, the longer ones, or the less like complex ones, he's able to get some pretty good emotional weight out of them. But the pure like genius on display as a comics formalist, someone who can do these wild formal constraints, is just pure pleasure for me as well. So this first one, called the Zimblin alphabet, you can see that each panel, like this is the I panel, so we have the character with the I, and a lot of the dialogue is, I can't believe it, I fear her reaction. And the next one's J, Judas, and you see how much of the image is constructed out of J's, the nose, the eye bags, the jaw, the K right here, the wrinkles on his eyes, the nose, the mouth. So that's the constraint on this one. It looks like is you have to use as much of the letter. You have to at least start the panel with that letter and use as much of it in the dialogue as possible. And then the image and the composition has to be kind of constructed largely out of the shapes that letter makes. So that wild thing to pull off. This is called The Continuity of Parks, and it's based on En el Ciento de by Julio Cortázar. Not sure what the constraint on this one was. I'm not going to go through and like read the constraint on each one. I was just, if I could spot them, I would make a note of it. But this does another kind of typical Matt Madden trick where Matt likes to have comics within comics. So you'll transition like a zoom in on a comic, and then now you're in this story. That's something that he's done in a number of his books. Particularly the Ex Libris book is kind of this infinite fall down of books into books into books. So another just fun, like kind of meta trick that Matt plays. The story, The Bridge, this is one of the longer stories. This is a book I've reviewed before because I got it from Matt, and some of these I've got from Matt in like single, they're, just as a zine or whatever. But this is a really beautiful, like emotional story where it's told in 3 parts, and there is a constraint on there. I think it's something about like the distance of time that has to be elapsed between each panel. It has to change at some predictable rate, or the distance between the chapters or something like that. But this one tells a really good sci-fi story. I don't want to get into it though, because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. Then there are a number of Haiku comics. It's cool to see Matt working with color on these ones. And I don't know, I'm assuming like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm assuming the amount of like objects has to also match the 5, 7, 5 or whatever it is. Of the syllables. I'm thinking that's what's going on with the images, because there's some kind of constraint. Yeah, there's like 7 and 5s there. So I think it goes deeper than just having a poem with an image on it. This is another really interesting one where he's talking to the United Postmodern. What's the title on this? I don't know if there is a title on this one, but that just goes like the U.S. Postmodern, Modern Post Office. Like he keeps playing with that name, and you can see down in here that he's playing with like modernist design and stuff. I really like the amount of approaches on this page. That's what drew me to Matt's work in the first place. Is the one comic that's told in 99 different styles. As someone who loves style as a formal aspect of comics, that's really something that Matt and I share. That's what drew me to his work. And you can see here, he's taking a pointillist approach, he's taking a cubist approach, he's taking like an old surrealist collage approach. Here he's taking the modernist design approach, the Jackson Pollock approach, the Mark Rothko. So there's just so much in there just with the type of imagery that he's able to communicate. I think it's a really, really wise way of working, and that's what I like working that way too. It's really fun. This story is this is one of the ones where it's such a wild constraint. He winds up telling a pretty good story in it, but then it comes down to a pretty silly joke in the end. But I think what's on this one is like the structure determines, like you see that these are the characters that you have to end up with at the end of the panels. That's the sestina structure that I was showing with the spiral. I don't know if it also determines who has to show up here or if he had the freedom to fill these in as long as these got hit. I think that's what it is, as long as these got hit. But it kind of ends. I'm not going to tell you the story, but I'm going to tell you the punchline, and you could get the book and figure out why it works. But all of that like cleverness set up for a punchline. Somebody fuck someone quick or we're doomed. So there's a rap song I like by MC Paul Barman where it ends, and it's the most clever rap song ever about burping and farting, and at the end it says so smart yet so stupid at the same time. And that's how I feel about this story. But you know, when you're making your bleeding brain grow, another Paul Barman reference like Matt is, you're allowed to throw in some just fun along the way. History of American Comics in 6 panels. I think this is another one of these great style play things that you get here where you're going through, like the old superhero comics, the comedy comics, Crumb, Watchmen, Mouse, Chris Ware. I do think that this is a really good example also that each one of these artists that they're showing here is an artist bound by the history of comics. So when I say like I call Chris Ware or Art Spiegelman or someone like that, comics that have gone to art school, that's what I mean, is these are people who are obsessed with comics first and then they wind up in art school and they usually fucking hate it. Dan Clowes, all those guys. You see more and more now what I call art school turning to comics, and I think that's where the best stuff is being done now. So this history of American comics is spot on, but I think the next step after this is that we start to celebrate our history but also look out beyond it a little bit further. A lot of the best comics that I've read in the last 5 years are people who kind of stumble into comics while they're in art school, and they're bringing a whole different perspective to it. So this is really fun to see. This is the type of style play. Oh, and I just realized we have Adrian Tomine in the back there. That's sneaky. Okay. Or no, that's Ghost World. That's Dan Clowes. Yeah. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. These are the guys right here. This is Dan Clowes, maybe Adrian Tomine, like all these guys who are Seth, that are a little over obsessed with the history of comics at the expense of looking forward. They're very looking backwards, all the people in that era. Really enjoy this, like ad as comic. This was done, I forget, I didn't write down the date, but I looked it up. Oh, here, 1995. So this was done far before Dave Sim would have been doing Glamourpuss, and I think I thought Glamourpuss was the first one who had kind of taken that approach to comics with like advertising and fashion magazine, but to see Matt doing it in 1995, bro, Dave Sim stole your style, man. This is really cool. And then there's a really fun game here that Matt Madden's playing with Tom Hart, who's also a hilarious and phenomenal cartoonist, whose work I've recently reviewed, and also really remember, I'm going to blank on the name of the one book he did, but the guy in Seattle, like the 90s, fuck Starbucks coffee kid that he did. So really enjoyed both of their work. And then this is a fun little game to play. Again, a wild constraint, and I would love to play it, but it's tic-tac-toe comics. So one person chooses X, one chooses O, and then I'm assuming you play it like tic-tac-toe. So like if Matt was X, then maybe this was the first drawing that got made and these are all left blank, but Matt had the X. And then Tom would have had to come in and put like the O here or the O there. And like that's how the game would have been played. So it's a really interesting thing where you'd be telling the story out of order, and you have to either figure out what came before or what came after, or once you start having like two panels like this, and you got to fill it in, you got to figure out what the intermediary panel would be. So that's a really, really fun one that I would like to play. I think you get a bunch of artists together, and this is a great game. And would make a fun collection of comics. So that's another thing that I feel like a lot of what Matt is doing in here, he's showing things that you could do collaboratively with other people. Like there's games that you could play both with yourself and with other people. I was also giving some examples of people who have done this in the past. So there's like a Scott McCloud kind of instructional aspect to this. Yeah, here he's talking about the number of lines that he's making in the Haiku comics. So none of this is like you're expected to figure it out on your own. You can pick up on some of it, but then there's also the instructional thing. So like I said, Uncivilized just makes smart books. They make educational books. Like Tom Kaczynski is deeply philosophical, and that educational, that rogue scholar type of thing that Ryan Holmberg's doing with his essays in all of the translations that he does, the kind of rogue scholarship work that Tom does in his own cartoon dialectics, that spills over into how he produces the books, what books he chooses, what's packaged into the books. And I think that makes everything Uncivilized does very, very valuable. Particularly, really, really stoked about getting this book. I'm a huge fan of Matt Madden, and this is something I already had on my radar. I was like, oh, new Matt Madden books. Matt had sent me a PDF of this before it was fully rounded out a while back, and I got to check it out in that format as well. So yeah, go check out our interview with Matt Madden. We talk a lot about constraints in comics. He's someone whose work I've been a huge fan of for the duration of the channel. And thank you so much, Tom, for sending over Matt's newest work. I'm always hungry for new Matt Madden work.